The Senate will come to order. I ask everyone present to please rise and recite the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
In the absence of clergy, let us bow our heads in a moment of silent reflection or prayer. Reading of the Journal.
In Senate, Sunday, January 8, 2022, the Senate met pursuant to adjournment. Journal of Saturday, January 7, 2023 was read and approved. On motion, the Senate adjourned.
Without objection, the Journal stands approved as read. Presentation of petitions. Messages from the Assembly. Messages from the Governor. Reports of standing committees. Reports of select committees. Communications and reports from state officers. Motions and resolutions. Senator Gianaris.
Good afternoon, Madam President. On behalf of Majority Leader Stuart Cousins, I hand up the following committee assignments of the Majority Conference and ask that it be filed in the Journal.
The hand-up is received and shall be filed in the Journal.
Majority Leader Stuart Cousins, in consultation with Senator Ort, I hand up the following committee assignments of the Minority Conference and ask that that also be filed in the Journal.
The hand-up is received and shall be filed in the Journal.
There will be an immediate meeting of the Elections Committee in room 332, followed immediately thereafter by a meeting of the Rules Committee in the same room.
There will be an immediate meeting of the Elections Committee in room 332, followed by a meeting of the Rules Committee in room 332.
The Senate will stand at ease.
The Senate will stand at ease. The Senate will return to order. Senator Gianaris.
Madam President, there's a report of the Rules Committee at the desk. Please take that up.
The Secretary will read.
Senator Stuart Cousins from the Committee on Rules reports the following bills. Senate Print 136 by Senator Krueger, an act to amend the election law. Senate Print 242 by Senator May, an act to amend the election law. Senate Print 263 by Senator Stuart Cousins, an act to amend the election law. Senate Print 350 by Senator Jackson, an act to amend the election law. Senate Print 585 by Senator May, an act to amend the election law. Senate Print 587 by Senator Comrie, an act to amend the election law. Senate Print 609 by Senator Hoylman, an act to amend the election law. Senate Print 610 by Senator Hoylman, an act to amend the election law. Senate Print 611 by Senator Mayer, an act to amend the election law. Senate Print 612 by Senator Mayer, an act to amend the election law. Senate Print 613A by Senator Myrie, an act to amend the tax law. Senate Print 614 by Senator Myrie, an act to amend the election law. Senate Print 616 by Senator Myrie, an act to amend the election law. Senate Print 617 by Senator Myrie, an act to amend the election law. Senate Print 619 by Senator Krueger, an act to amend the election law. Senate Print 644 by Senator Mannion, an act to amend the election law. Senate Print 645 by Senator Mannion, an act to amend the election law. Senate Print 657 by Senator Myrie, an act to amend the election law. Senate Print 811 by Senator Breslin, an act to amend the insurance law. Senate Print 812 by Senator Ramos, an act to amend the social services law. Senate Print 813 by Senator Lieu, an act to amend the education law. Senate Print 814 by Senator Kennedy, an act to amend the state finance law. Senate Print 815 by Senator Kennedy, an act to amend the public authorities law. Senate Print 816 by Senator Hoylman, an act to amend the general business law. Senate Print 817 by Senator Hoylman, an act to amend the elder law. Senate Print 818 by Senator Myrie, an act to amend a chapter of the law of 2022, amending the election law. Senate Print 819 by Senator Claire, an act to amend the public health law. Senate Print 820 by Senator May, an act to amend a chapter of the law of 2022. Senate Print 821 by Senator Harkin, an act to amend the tax law. Senate Print 822 by Senator May, an act to amend the election law. Senate Print 823 by Senator Mannion, an act to amend the mental hygiene law. Senate Print 824 by Senator Sanders, an act to amend the insurance law. Senate Print 825 by Senator Hoylman, an act to amend the insurance law. Senate Print 826 by Senator Skoufis, an act to amend the chapter of the law of 2022, amending the alcoholic beverage control law. Senate Print 827 by Senator Breslin, an act to amend the public health law. Senate Print 828 by Senator Mayer, an act to amend the executive law. Senate Print 829 by Senator Sanders, an act to amend the agriculture and markets law. Senate Print 830 by Senator Brisport, an act to amend the social services law. Senate Print 831 by Senator Rivera, an act relating to the availability of training for state-approved education or training programs. Senate Print 823 by Senator Brisport, an act to amend the public health law. Senate Print 833 by Senator Breslin, an act to amend the chapter of the law of 2022, amending the insurance law. Senate Print 834 by Senator Kavanaugh, an act to amend the environmental conservation law. Senate Print 835 by Senator Comrie, an act to amend the public health law. Senate Print 836 by Senator Breslin, an act to amend the insurance law. Senate Print 837 by Senator Rivera, an act to amend the public health law. Senate Print 838 by Senator Ryan, an act to amend the labor law. Senate Print 839 by Senator Breslin, an act to amend the public health law. Senate Print 840 by Senator Kennedy, an act to amend the highway law. Senate Print 841 by Senator Bailey, an act to amend the executive law. Senate Print 842 by Senator Kavanaugh, an act to amend the real property tax law. Senate Print 843 by Senator Liu, an act to amend the education law. Senate Print 844 by Senator Skoufis, an act to amend the agriculture and markets law. Senate Print 845 by Senator Skoufis, an act to amend the public health law. Senate Print 846 by Senator Gianaris, an act to amend the general business law. Senate Print 847 by Senator Hinchey, an act to amend the agriculture and markets law. Senate Print 848 by Senator Gianaris, an act to amend the labor law. Senate Print 849 by Senator Prasad, an act to amend the executive law. Senate Print 850 by Senator Jackson, an act to amend the labor law. Senate Print 851 by Senator Ramos, an act to amend the labor law. Senate Print 852 by Senator Skoufis, an act to amend the election law. Senate Print 853 by Senator Breslin, an act to amend the education law. Senate Print 854 by Senator Sanders, an act to amend the executive law. Senate Print 855 by Senator May, an act to amend the public health law. Senate Print 856 by Senator Harkam, an act to repeal Section 1 of a chapter of the laws 2022. Senate Print 857 by Senator Matera, an act to amend the environmental conservation law. Senate Print 858 by Senator Mannion, an act to amend the state finance law. Senate Print 859 by Senator Ryan, an act to amend the education law and the tax law. Senate Print 860 by Senator Holman, an act to amend the domestic relations law. All bills report directed third reading.
The report of the Rules Committee.
All those in favor of accepting the report of the Rules Committee signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The Rules Committee report is accepted. Senator Gianaris.
Please take up the reading of the supplemental calendar.
The Secretary will read.
Calendar number 3, Senate Print 242 by Senator May, an act to amend the election law.
The bill is laid aside.
Calendar number 4, Senate Print 263 by Senator Stewart Cousins, an act to amend the election law.
Read the last section.
Section 5, this act shall take effect immediately.
Call the roll.
Addabbo, Gianaris Kruger, Ort, Stewart Cousins, White.
Announce the results.
Ayes 60.
The bill is passed.
Calendar number 5, Senate Print 350 by Senator Jackson, an act to amend the election law.
The bill is laid aside.
Calendar number 9, Senate Print 610 by Senator Holman, an act to amend the election law.
The bill is laid aside.
Calendar number 14, Senate Print 616 by Senator Myrie, an act to amend the election law.
Read the last section.
Section 2, this act shall take effect immediately.
Call the roll.
Addabbo, Gianaris Kruger, Ort, Stewart Cousins, White.
Announce the results.
In relation to calendar 14, those senators voted in the negative are Senators Borrello, Canzoneri Fitzpatrick, Gallivan, Hellman, Matera, Murray, Oberacker, O'Mara, Ort, Rhodes, Rollison, Steck, Tedisco, Weber, and White. Ayes 45, nays 15.
The bill is passed.
Calendar number 19, Senate Print 657 by Senator Myrie, an act to amend the election law.
The bill is laid aside. Senator Gianaris, that completes the reading of today's supplemental calendar.
Can we now go to the reading of the controversial calendar?
The Secretary will ring the bell. The Secretary will read.
Calendar number 3, Senate Print 242 by Senator May, an act to amend the election law.
Senator Borrello, why do you rise?
Madam President, would the sponsor yield for some questions? For a question.
Senator May, do you yield for question?
I do.
Senator yields.
All right, thank you. Hello again, Senator May. I know we went through this last year, but I certainly would like to refresh everyone's memory. So my first question is, could you please define what a portable polling station is and what it would look like?
Through you, Madam President. A portable polling station, I think of them more as pop-up polling stations, is a location that a Board of Elections can, and I will say can, is not required to, but this is at their discretion, can set up for 3 days or more at some site in the district where people can vote. And the idea is to set it up in places where people are, either where they're at a shopping center or at a major employer, on the days when people will be there, to make it easier for voters to access the franchise.
Madam President, will the sponsor continue to yield?
Senator May, do you continue to yield? The sponsor yields.
Through you, Madam President. So the word is portable, and you use the term pop-up. I know pop-up shops. I know what you're saying. That's obviously, so you're saying that wouldn't necessarily, last year we talked about it, and you talked about something mobile. I referred to it as a voter food truck, potentially. Are we limiting the scope? Because I'm concerned really about, when I think of pop-up, I think of something that might not be secure. What are we going to do to ensure, because when you have a polling place is a school, it's a fire hall, it's a place with locked doors and security. A pop-up or a mobile, some kind of a mobile unit, how are we going to ensure that they're secure?
So there are through you, Madam President, there are criminal consequences to interfering with a polling place. There's no reason to assume that these would be non-secure if it was a van or if it was a location that was identified for a shorter period of time than an early voting place. Think about same-day polling. They're there for just 1 day. These would be there for 3 days. There is plenty of opportunity to make them secure.
Will sponsor continue to yield?
Do you continue to yield? The sponsor yields.
Yeah, through you, Madam President. So, I spent 10 years in county government, and, when we started doing early voting when I was county executive, we had a very deliberate process that came about, and there were guardrails put in place by legislation as to where, hours, so forth. So what guardrails do we have to ensure that these are indeed secure? What in the legislation would ensure that these portable places, these pop-up shops, pop-up voting stations would be secure?
So at the level of the state board, through you, Madam President, the state board can issue regulations to make sure that they are secure, and then at the local level, each of the decision whether to employ portable polling places would be determined by the elections commissioners of both parties in advance. It wouldn't be a spur-of-the-moment decision. It would be done, I believe, at least 2 weeks in advance. So there are plenty of opportunities for guardrails of the kinds you're talking about.
Yield?
You continue to yield?
Of course.
Sponsor yield.
So the legislation mentions population density and considerations like public transportation. I represent rural areas. We don't have a lot of public transportation. But when you start saying population density, are you saying that the denser populations would get a preference for a portable polling station? In other words, the more population, the more likelihood that you'd get a portable polling station?
Madam President, actually, this is likely to be more helpful for rural areas than any place else. In Idaho, when portable polling places were in practice, that was the idea, to make sure that people in rural areas didn't have to travel very far to access early voting. And I know I have represented counties that had only one early voting polling place, But this would enable them not to be committed to that one polling place for the entire early voting period, but they could also put one for a few days at a place where they knew a lot of residents of the county would be. So it actually can be better for seniors, for people who live in remote areas but tend to gather in some particular place at certain times of the week.
Madam President, sponsor continue to yield.
Do you continue to yield?
I do.
Sponsor yields.
So whether it's early voting or election day, we have specified hours and specified days. And those are set by State Board of Elections and adhered to by the local boards of elections. What, if anything, in this legislation would stop a local board of elections saying, well, in this particular area, we're going to have them there at 5 o'clock in the morning or 10 o'clock at night, and this area somewhere? Are there any restrictions, any guardrails as to the hours of operations of these voter food trucks, whatever we might call them?
Through you, Madam President. Number one, they can't supersede state law. And number two, that whole idea of seeking places where there's population density, the idea is where are people going to be during the week so that we can make it easier for them to vote. That is the whole point of this bill and a lot of other legislation that we have passed, is to make sure that people can have access to their polling places.
Madam President, sponsor continue to yield.
You continue to yield?
Gladly.
Sponsor yields.
Thank you. So I want to go back to the population density question. So what you're saying is that it's not resident population density. You're saying that if it's busy on Saturday at Walmart, we want to send the pop-up voting station to the parking lot of the local Walmart. Is that the idea?
Through you, Madam President, in the bill, you can't set these up for less than 3 days in a row. So it wouldn't be on a particular afternoon. It would be aimed at a period of time during the week. But yes, you could say that this is an area where a lot of people in our county are going to be on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. We can predict that there will be a lot of people there. This is a good place to set up a polling station.
Continue to yield.
You continue to yield?
I will.
Sponsor yield.
Yeah. So, one of the most popular spots to shop where I am is actually right on the border of Pennsylvania. So right now in New York State, we don't require you to show an ID to prove who you are. So you could have people from the state of Pennsylvania that are showing up at a very popular Walmart location that's literally a stone's throw from the state of Pennsylvania. How are we going to ensure that those people are who they say they are because we're showing up at the Walmart parking lot for 3 days in a row? How do we ensure that those people are actually eligible to vote at the pop-up site?
Through you, Madam President, the electronic poll books that we use now in New York State that are so effective at making our elections more efficient are also making our elections more secure. And they wouldn't be on the list. They would show up, but they wouldn't be in the poll book. So if they tried to vote, they would not be able to. And I will also add there would be legal consequences if they tried to.
Bill?
Senator Borrello on the bill.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator May. Appreciate it. I think when we talk about some kind of a portable station, it sounds like a nice idea. We want to send a food truck or a pop-up shop so people can vote wherever they want. But it is less and less, when you get into the details, there's less and less details as to how we will ensure they are secure. When we have a polling place right now, it's in a school. Schools have, unfortunately become fortresses, but they are secure for us to hold our elections, and they are secure places to ensure that overnight, wherever they might be, that they are secure. But to do something like this with no real parameters as to what this looks like, we're saying it could be a portable, it could be pop-up, it could be on wheels, it might not be. There's just not enough guardrails to ensure we're doing this properly. And I do have a lot of concerns because at the end of the day in New York State, you don't have to show an ID. And someone could come up knowing someone else's address and phone number or their address and their name, and they could vote somewhere else without anyone knowing that. Now that certainly is the case in general in New York State because we should require something as simple as to show an ID to vote, but we're going to make it that much more difficult to track and that much less secure with these portable stations. So I'll be voting no. Thank you.
Oh, is that right? Senator Walczyk.
Thank you, Madam President. If the sponsor would yield for a couple of questions.
Senator May, will you yield?
I will.
Through you, Madam President, are there examples of where this type of thing has been done before?
Madam President, California, Georgia, and Idaho are the states that I know of that have had portable polling places.
Madam President, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Do you continue to yield?
I do.
Sponsor yields.
Through you, Madam President, how long have those systems been in place before you're proposing this in New York State election law?
I will say several years. Many of them came into being as a result of the pandemic as a way for people to vote safely.
Madam Speaker, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
You continue to yield?
I do.
Sponsor yields.
You mentioned in the last section of debate a number of times population density. Why does this work so much better in areas that are densely populated than it does in rural areas?
President, that's exactly what I did not say. We're talking about the density of people in a place at a particular time. And so if you have a rural county that is not at all dense and only one early voting place, they may have to travel a very long way to get to that early voting place. But if a lot of people congregate at the shopping mall or at the major employer in that area on particular days of the week, then setting up a polling place there for a few days is a way to give people access to the franchise who might not be able to get to the polling place that is, the one polling place that is set up in their county for early voting. So we're talking about density of people at any given time, not density of residents.
Thank you. And through you, Madam Speaker, appreciate the example of an employer, for instance, where people would congregate every day for their work. If the sponsor would continue to yield.
Do you continue to yield?
I do.
Sponsor yields.
Is there any specific employer that's worked in the examples in California or that you envision in New York State, a great employer that you think that we should have a special polling site just for the employees of their location?
So I don't have any, through you, Madam President, I don't have any specific examples. This is something that the two commissioners would have to agree on. I do know, for example, in my county, the community college is a place where there are a lot of people who come through and on certain days of the week. And that would be an obvious place to put a polling place on 3 or 4 weekdays, because it would be someplace where a lot of people would be and would give them the opportunity to vote on those days.
Thank you for yielding for my questions. Madam President, on the bill.
Senator Walczyk on the bill.
So a community college would be a perfect example, or a college would be a perfect example of the intent of this legislation. We know that the way college faculties and students tend to vote, it's not generally, and while they may be condensed, and somehow we're saying this is still rural, but also condensed in a population density at the same time. It sounds confusing, and probably for someone that's listening to this debate, it's actually pretty straightforward. Democrats tend to vote in more population-dense areas. College campuses would be those types of consolidated areas. Even if they're in a very rural area, I represented an assembly district that was very rural. The proclivity to vote Democrat was in the 2 college towns in that assembly district. I now represent a large Senate district in upstate New York that has some population density, and in those areas of population density, which would make probably good early voting mobile sites by the sponsor of this bill, those areas also vote generally for one party over the other. Madam Speaker, this is pretty obvious on its face to me. I'll be voting no and encourage my colleagues to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Krueger.
Thank you, Madam President. Will the sponsor please yield to a couple of questions?
The sponsor yield?
Gladly.
So the yield.
Thank you. So, just in follow-up to some of the discussion I've heard, my familiarity with the New York State lines are that we are a stone's throw from Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Connecticut, around almost all our borders, and certainly in New York City, we're a stone's throw from New Jersey. Is there any research that shows that people come across those state lines to vote in our elections because it's close to them?
Through you, Madam President, I am not aware of any such research, but Senator Myrie has a bill for collecting the data, so we may know better about that. But I believe we would hear about it if it actually happened.
Through you, Madam President, if the sponsor would yield for another question.
Will you continue to yield?
I do.
Sponsor yields.
Thank you so much. So one of my colleagues also just raised a concern that somehow this would be different in rural versus urban or more densely populated areas. I think I do agree that rural New York probably has disproportionately greater numbers of Republican voters than urban areas. I think that data is available. Is there any reason we should be concerned that we would want to make it easier for Republican voters in rural areas to be able to vote?
Through you, Madam President, I'm not sure I understand the question, but I believe we should be making it easier for everybody to vote, and that is the purpose of this and many other bills that we have passed.
Thank you. On the bill, Madam President.
Senator Krueger on the bill.
Thank you. I sincerely don't understand why people would oppose wanting to make it easier for people to vote, regardless of where they live, regardless of what party. I think, in fact, it is our obligation as elected officials within a democracy where we are decided by voters that we try to make it as accessible for people to vote as possible. And I think clearly expanding the number of sites increases the opportunities for more people to vote, and that in itself is a good thing. Should we be concerned about security in elections? We should always be concerned about everything. That's what we get paid for to some degree. But the research is clear that when you make it easier for people to vote, it doesn't increase voter fraud. We've massively expanded voting through opportunities through early voting and absentee ballot voting, and there's no basis to believe that somehow we have corrupted our democratic process that way. And the research nationally by all parties agrees that that is not a problem. I must admit, while I'm certainly not from a rural area, it's called Manhattan Island. It's small but quite dense. We have actually voting booths within the lobbies of residential buildings because we find it so hard to find enough spaces for people to vote. So while it's not exactly rural pop-up, it's not exactly an armed camp either. It's just the lobby as you come in and out of your building. And I don't believe New York City has found to have any additional problems with security by putting voting booths and a worker or two within the lobby of a building. So I think there is plenty of research from our own state and from our nation that any model that helps assist voters get to vote is a good thing, and I certainly am proud to be voting yes on this today. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Senator Murray.
Madam President, through you, would the sponsor yield for a few questions?
Does the sponsor yield?
I will.
The sponsor yield.
Thank you. Since early voting has begun, do we have any estimates regarding the overall cost of, the overall turnout of early voters?
Do not have an answer to that, but it's many, many thousands of people have access to early voting.
Through you, Madam President, would the sponsor continue to yield?
Do you continue to yield?
I do.
The sponsor yields.
Thank you. I guess I was looking for more of a percentage. Do we have a guesstimate as to percentage of voter turnout through early voting over the 10-day period?
President, I think it has varied widely because we've only had early voting for a short period of time, and it's been increasing significantly year by year.
Through you, Madam President, would the sponsor continue to yield?
Yield? The sponsor yield.
So when we set up the locations for the early voting, I think some of the criteria was, if I'm not mistaken, I believe it was for every 50,000 voters, there had to be a location. I know I'm in the town of Brookhaven, about 500,000 people, and we have 10 early voting locations. So some of the criteria, I believe, was population density, public transportation, commuter traffic patterns, travel to polling places. Did we use that same criteria when setting up those early voting locations that you're using for these?
President, I did get a statistic that 1.1 million people used early voting in 2022 in New York State. Yes, those were the same criteria that were applied, and at the same time, I will also say in my county, there was strong opposition to having the maximum number of polling places for early voting from the Republican side, and we ended up with a very restricted number, and they worked very hard to make sure they were not in the places that had the most people in them. So it is a shifting landscape, I would say, of where the polling places are being located, and a very political decision.
Through you, Madam President, with the sponsor continue to yield.
Do you continue to yield? Sponsor
definitely.
yield.
Do you have a guesstimate on how many portable locations you'd like to have throughout the state?
And so this would not be up to me or to us. It would be up to the elections commissioners of each county to decide if this were a valuable thing for the voters of that district.
Madam President, with the sponsor continue to yield.
Do you continue to yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yield.
Thank you. And do you have an estimate cost of each pop-up polling place, whether per day or per 3-day period?
President, we do not believe that this will incur additional costs that can't be absorbed within the existing resources. But again, that would be up to the elections commissioners of each county.
President, with the sponsor continue to yield.
Do you continue to yield? The
Yes.
sponsor yield.
Thank you. I'm a little confused. So if we're staffing these pop-up locations, and I believe it's a requirement that there be ballots on hand at all voting locations in the event that every voter turned out, they must have those ballots on hand. How would there be no additional cost if you must staff the pop-up location and also make sure there are adequate ballots on hand?
Through you, Madam President. So first of all, they can be printed on demand. You don't have to have the ballots in advance. And if every single voter showed up to vote in these locations, then you could presumably save on staff at other voting locations because there's a limited number of people who can vote in a district.
And with the sponsor continue to yield.
You continue to yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yield.
But you are saying the pop-up locations will be, there will be people on hand working the pop-up locations, correct? And they are in addition to the early voting locations?
President, that is correct if the elections commissioners decide that that is the best way to use their resources.
With the sponsor continue to yield.
Do you continue to yield? The sponsor yield.
Will there also be agreements in place, and who would do this as far as liability, as you mentioned earlier, say for a Walmart parking lot or somewhere like this? Who takes up the liability costs of having this location on hand?
Through you, Madam President, the procedure would be the same as for other polling places. The commissioners would work through the location to get the permissions and to set up the space.
Through you, Madam President, with the sponsor continue to yield.
Do you continue to yield?
I do.
Sponsor yield.
Last one, I promise. So I mentioned earlier, I'm from Brookhaven. We have a special election coming up in a week or so, and I literally had to look up where the locations are. I've spoken to a lot of people since it is still new, and a lot of people don't know where the early voting locations are now that are in existence. How would we let voters know that a pop-up location is going to be there, or would this just be a spur of the moment, hey, look over there, there it is?
President, the locations would be announced 2 weeks before the election, and the boards would have to give notice to voters where the locations are, as they do with early voting sites. But I will also add that this idea has the advantage that if you didn't bother to look up the list, but you happen to be in this place that people tend to congregate in this particular place within your community where people are, and a voting place happens to be there, you wouldn't have had to look it up. You could just walk in and vote, which is one of the beauties of this proposal, compared to the ones where you've got to find some remote place that the elections commissioners agreed on as a permanent early voting site.
Much I appreciate it, Madam President. On the bill.
Senator Murray on the bill.
So, as we've talked about this, and the percentages, by the way, of early voting, it's less than 10%, but so we won't be in danger of everyone going to a pop-up location, I assure you. But when we talk about the ease of voting and making it easier, I find it difficult to find out what is so difficult about voting now. We have early voting, we have absentee voting, we have the voting when you show up on election day. It doesn't seem to be that difficult, but I worry about the cost involved, whether it is liability insurance, whether it is advertising these locations, whether it is staffing these locations and providing the materials. I just wonder if it's justified with the cost that we're imposing right now. We have early voting now. It's, as you said, it's starting to become a little bit more popular. But we had, like I said, in my town of Brookhaven, 10 early voting locations. It isn't difficult to find, and it's not difficult to show up to vote. So I just wonder about, does the cost justify doing this? So I will be voting no. Thank you.
Senator Weig.
President, would the sponsor yield for a few questions?
The sponsor yield?
I will.
The sponsor yield.
Thank you. So through you, Madam President, along the same lines as Senator Murray, I have some cost-related questions. One, how will voters know about these spots? So are they going to pop up from election to election, whether it's a primary or a general election from year to year? Are they going to be different places? And if so, the advertising for this, who bears the cost of that?
President. As it is now, the boards of elections have to communicate with voters about polling locations, many of which change from year to year, as do the early voting locations. So they are doing this outreach on a regular basis already. In this case, they would, if they made a decision like this, they would be making the decision in the context of what their resources were for advertising it, and they would have to put out notice 2 weeks in advance. They can do some of that by electronically for free, but some of it might have a cost, but presumably they wouldn't decide, as I said at the very outset, this is entirely voluntary on their part. They wouldn't decide to do this if they couldn't afford it.
Through you, Madam President, just to clarify, so would these be consistent, or would they be different from election to primary, a general election to a primary election? Are these going to change all the time?
Madam President, it could change if the two election commissioners agreed to that. But either way, they would have to give notice as the same way they give notice about early voting sites about each election cycle.
Through you, Madam President, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Do you continue to yield?
I do.
Sponsor yield.
So right now, do we pay to use schools and fire departments in order to be polling places at this time?
President, no, we do not.
To yield?
Do you continue to yield? Sponsor yield.
So these pop-up stores or vehicles, whatever happens to be convenient, how are they being paid for?
Through you, Madam President, once again, this is entirely voluntary on the part of the boards of elections. The elections commissioners will decide what their budgets can handle and whether it is a cost-effective way to use money from their budgets.
President, would the sponsor continue to yield?
Do you continue to yield? Sponsor yield.
Are there going to be any determinations as to whether or not something could be, donated in kind, a storefront, possibly, could there be any guidance on that so that there's no alleged in kind that's done improperly or politically?
President, this is another area where the State Board of Elections can issue regulations to make sure that nothing is being done that is a conflict of interest, for example, but I see no reason why that couldn't happen if the boards of elections decided that was, or if the elections commissioners decided that was to their advantage and to the
Madam
advantage of the
President, would the
voters.
sponsor continue to yield?
Continue to yield?
I do.
Sponsor yield.
So none of these details are actually in the bill?
President, the bill is designed as it was in California and Idaho and Georgia to provide maximum flexibility to the elections commissioners to make those determinations about what is best for the voters of their county so that they can most easily access the franchise.
Very much.
Senator Rhodes.
President, will the sponsor yield?
Do you yield?
I do.
Sponsor yield.
I am from Nassau County. We have a population of 1.4 million people, and we have 27 early voting locations throughout the county. As a former county legislator, I've received exactly 0 complaints about being able to access an early voting location. Is the sponsor aware of any studies that have been conducted? Are there any examples that can be provided of anyone in any area of the state that hasn't had access to an early voting location through the normal process?
President, I will say that I'm envious of your county, which has a much higher rate of early voting sites than mine does. I did represent a county that had one early voting site in the geographic center of the county, but that meant 45 minute to an hour drive for people who lived at the corners of that county. And this might furnish an opportunity if the elections commissioners decided it was a valuable thing for them to make voting more accessible to people in some remote corner of that county.
Another question.
Do you continue to yield?
I do.
The sponsor yield.
Thank you, Senator. Would there be anything that prevents a county board of elections from establishing an additional early voting location, or are they required to do one per 50,000?
President, I believe they can establish as many as they like. Number set by law, but they can have more than that. One of the advantages of this system is that they can do this for just 3 days. So when they establish early voting sites, they have to have them for the entire length of the early voting period, which may be prohibitive in terms of the amount of staff that they can provide for those. But if they have their minimum number of early voting sites, and then they want to be more flexible with some other sites, they can do it this way.
Continue to yield?
Do you continue to yield?
I
Senator yield.
Thank you. But essentially, though, the boards of elections do already have the right to be able to establish as many early voting locations as they want, correct?
And I believe that is true, yes.
And would the senator continue to yield?
Do you continue to yield?
I do.
Senator yields.
With respect to security, Senator Borrello brought up a point with respect to people coming in from outside the area to vote. Under your bill, would it be possible, for example, to place an early voting location in the somewhat rare event that the Mets, for example, are playing in late October? Would it be possible to place an early voting location at Citi Field?
President, there's no reason that wouldn't be possible, but they have to do it for at least 3 days. So it might not be advantageous to do it. And the people who voted there would have to live in the relevant district in
Do you continue to yield?
yes.
Senator yields.
At a location such as that, where you have a variety of people from all different areas coming into the same location, would that not make it very difficult for the Board of Elections, without having a tremendous number of staff on hand, to be able to handle that density of population?
President, so I understand in New York City, early voting locations are assigned. You can't go and vote at any early voting site. I'm not sure how that would apply to the, I guess it would be the same. You would be assigned to this site and not be able to vote at other sites.
Do you continue to yield? Senator yields.
Again, with respect to cost, as many of my colleagues have raised, though, the example that I've cited, would that not lead to an extensive amount of cost and personnel in that particular situation?
President, I will repeat, this is entirely at the discretion of the Republican and Democratic elections commissioners for that area. And so if they decide it is cost prohibitive, they won't do it. If they decide that the cost, whatever the cost might be, it could be nothing, or it could be nominal, or it could be something more significant, but they could decide if the payoff in terms of the numbers of people who would gain access to voting would be large enough. So it's giving them a tool that they don't have right now for a shorter period of time to set up a polling place in a location where they think that is a valid thing to do.
Senator Rhodes on the bill.
Thank you, Madam President. It seems as though here we have a solution in search of a problem, with all due respect. We have boards of elections that are already enabled to establish as many early voting locations as they wish. We've established statewide a minimum number of locations. If there is a rural county that sees a need to be able to establish a second early voting location, they already have the ability to do that. But through this bill, if it were to pass, we create a situation where we have legitimate security concerns, we have legitimate cost concerns, and there's no discernible benefit that arises from doing it. Since in the rare instance where you have a situation, there's already a process for local boards of elections to address that. So I will be voting no on the bill, and I would urge my colleagues to do the same. Thank you, Madam President.
Are there any other senators wishing to be heard? Seeing and hearing none, debate is closed. The secretary will ring the bell. Read the last section.
Section 2, this action take effect on the 1st of January.
Call the roll.
Addabbo, Gianaris, Kruger, Ort, Stewart, Cousins, White.
Senator May to explain her vote.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you to my colleagues for a spirited debate. I want to say this is, as I said, a tool in the toolbox of our boards of elections to make it easier for people to vote, instead of having to create a whole new early voting site for the full 10 days of early voting, they can make one for just 3 in a location that they think is a valuable place to do it. I am concerned about one thing that one of my colleagues said, which was that we need to make sure that we're not putting polling places in places where people are, because that might lead to more Democrats voting. This is a deeply concerning concept, and one that, I mean, the extension of that would be you'd only put polling places in the most remote locations so that the fewest people could vote. Our whole idea behind Democracy Day today and the last 5 years that I have been voting in this body has been to make voting more accessible, more fair, more transparent, and more reliable. And I believe we have done that through the more than 100 bills that we have passed in the last 5 years to strengthen our democracy from one of the worst set of voting laws in the country to some of the best. I am proud to vote for this bill and to have voted for some of those other changes to our election laws that really have made our elections far more accessible to New Yorkers of all walks of life in all corners of the state. I vote aye.
Senator May to be recorded in the affirmative. Senator Steck to explain his vote.
Thank you, Madam President. I've enjoyed listening to my colleagues discuss this and many related issues today regarding our elections. I particularly was caught by the sponsor mentioning over and over again that the local boards of elections locally would have this kinds of flexibility to make a decision that made the most sense for that county. I applaud that. However, I will point out that this bill is different from a lot of other election laws where we have refused those boards of elections that kind of flexibility. There's at least 10 bills from 10 different counties, members of both sides of the aisle, that went nowhere last year, that wanted to make for deviations on something that they had no flexibility in, where the early voting sites went. One county of mine in particular, the County Board of Supervisors unanimously wanted to ask us to change so that it didn't have to go into a lone city in the county, because it made more sense to have the early voting location at the county seat, where there's security, where there's disability, accessibility, and instead they insisted, the bills moved nowhere. The elections commissioners both wanted it, the city of Glens Falls wanted it, the county board unanimously wanted it, but the law was inflexible and denied them that opportunity. So I'd like to see a little more consistency if we're going to throw around, we're going to give the locals a little more flexibility. And for that and many other reasons, I'm voting against this bill.
Senator Steck to be recorded in the negative. Announce the results.
In relation to calendar number 3, those senators voted in the negative are Senators Ashby, Borrello, Canzoneri Fitzpatrick, Gallivan, Hellman, Matera, Murray, Oberacker, O'Mara, Ort, Rhodes, Rollison, Steck, Tedisco, Walzak, Weber, and White. Ayes 43, nays 17.
Pass. Senator Gianaris.
Move on to calendar 19 by Senator Myrie.
The Secretary will ring the bell. The Secretary will read.
Calendar number 19, Senate Print 657 by Senator Myrie, an act to amend the election law.
Senator Walsh.
Nation, please.
Do you want Senator? Senator Wolsick, are you asking Senator Myrie to explain the bill? Excellent. Senator Myrie.
Me explaining my vote, but responding to an on-the-bill question, correct?
Correct.
Okay. The purpose of this bill, you don't have to look much further than some of the questioning from some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. They asked about data. They said, have you found any studies? Have you seen any research? Is there anything that indicates percentages? All of those things are things that this bill would help accomplish. Establishing an institute, a central repository for election data, many of which is already collected, but centralizing it to relieve the pressure on local county boards of elections, to relieve their obligation to have to respond to FOIA requests, to relieve the cost they have to pay for voting litigation. If we consolidate this into a center institute where all of this information can be available, I think that we would make a lot of progress towards picking out some of these patterns that my colleagues are so concerned about.
Senator Wilson.
Thank you, Madam President. Would the sponsor yield for some questions?
Senator Myrie, do you yield?
Yes.
Senator yields.
And I appreciate his explanation through you, Madam President. Why can't we seek some of this data and analysis from the private institutions, private colleges in the state of New York?
Madam President, primarily because the information gathered all together does not yet exist. Right now we have a hodgepodge of information where some local boards collect this information, some school districts collect this information, some other local elections, sewage races, water districts, they collect the information, but many of them don't. So we don't know as a state, for instance, what are all the results for the school district elections last year? We don't have that. So this is meant, again, to wrap this all around into a central repository. And it makes sense that we would turn to our public institutions because we are a public body. And it's important for us to support the work that SUNY does and CUNY does, the opportunity that this would provide, both for students and faculty, to dig into this data and really give us the things that we need to help our elections run smoother, I think is an opportunity that should be welcomed by all.
Through you, Madam President, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Do you continue to yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
And my understanding from the conversation in our committee meeting today was that this language came from the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. Is that correct?
Through you, Madam President, this, in a slightly different iteration, was contained in the first draft of that bill.
And through you, Madam President, why was that language taken, if the sponsor would continue to yield?
Do you continue to yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Why was that language removed before the bill was voted on in this House?
Through you, Madam President, we thought it would make sense because of how robust this institute might be that we break it out into a separate bill.
Through you, Madam President, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Do you continue to yield? The
Sure.
sponsor yields.
Does SUNY and CUNY support the language that it is today in the bill that we're about to vote on?
We drafted this in many conversations with both CUNY and SUNY and with professors that work closely in this area at both institutions.
Through you, Madam President, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Do you continue to yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Has SUNY or CUNY issued that support publicly?
Through you, Madam President, there's no official statement from SUNY or CUNY on this bill.
Through you, Madam President, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Do you continue to yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
I understand in public policy and legislation that's pending, sometimes SUNY or CUNY won't issue a statement. They'll often push you to the second floor. So I wonder, through you, Madam President, if the sponsor could explain whether the governor's office supports this piece of legislation or not.
Madam President, I will never divine what the governor is thinking or supporting, absent that being on the record.
And through you, Madam President, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Do you continue to yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Is there a fiscal note that goes along with this bill?
President, there is. This would cost $2 million. My understanding is that most of that comes up front, and so that's for the building of the technology that would be necessary and the staffing, but that cost would bear itself out as we go down the line, not forcing local boards of elections to have to promulgate some of this information themselves.
Madam President, on the bill, thank you.
Senator Walsick on the bill.
Yeah, $2 million, I know in this House can seem like small potatoes. This is the type of legislation that has a fiscal impact, and just for context and to get it into the record, I became the ranking member on the Elections Committee. We called an Elections Committee off the floor today on our first day of regular business in session, found out about the bills that were on the agenda in the middle of the weekend, and today is Monday. So I didn't have a whole lot of time, and that's part of the reason that I asked about support and opposition. Didn't have a lot of time to interface with SUNY institutions that I represent or SUNY and CUNY at large to get feedback, nor did I have an opportunity to reach out to the governor's office and get feedback from their people in higher education. So I think it's important to get some of those things on the record. But with we know the governor is going to present her State of the State tomorrow, and we know that after the State of the State is going to come the budget, the governor's budget, and an address that will go along with that will outline the priorities of the executive branch. We have a new chancellor at SUNY and CUNY, and those are the types of things that I would hope that we as a legislative body wouldn't just put on our higher education institutions without hearing from them first. So I won't be comfortable in moving forward and supporting this. In concept, I think it sounds great to say we should have our public institutions look at our elections and then recommend policy back to us. But just saying that SUNY and CUNY alone, without any private institution or outside entity, should have some kind of impact or some kind of input to how we run our elections in New York State, I think we're missing a grand opportunity here and could wash over a lot of institutional knowledge for great schools that have done a phenomenal job, nationwide names in schools that have done a phenomenal job in the area of polling, how elections run, what motivates voters, how we make sure that people feel enfranchised and actually are enfranchised. If we just do this in our, castle down the hill or the castle up the hill, that's SUNY down the hill and this one up the hill, I think we miss a grand opportunity to make good public policy. And that's why I'll be voting no and encourage my colleagues to do the same. Thank you, Madam Speaker, or Madam President.
Senator Weick.
President, would the sponsor yield for a question?
Senator Myrie, do you yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Thank you. So, State Board of Elections has oversight with both a Republican and a Democrat. And I'm just curious, because the New York State Board of Elections has no authority over New York State schools, who will be the authority to conduct oversight over this data collection?
The data collected by this institute would also have to be sent to the State Board of Elections.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what he said.
Sure. The data that is collected by this institute would also have to be sent to the State Board of Elections.
Does the sponsor continue to yield?
Do you continue to yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
So I'm sorry, maybe you could clarify, what is the authority who's going to be overseeing to make sure that this is bipartisan data that's being collected on the part of the SUNY and the CUNY institutes?
President, if I could just explain the process. This would require local boards of elections to send the data that they have to this institute. And we mentioned in the bill explicitly that it has to be nonpartisan. And so this wouldn't be the institute going in and taking information from several. It's a reporting requirement on the local boards of elections and other school districts to report that information to the institute. And just to address, I forgot to mention this, this data would be made publicly available. And so this isn't proprietary. This would allow for private institutions, should they so wish, to figure out what the data means to them. But this is really an attempt for us, again, to make a central repository from a lot of data that is already being collected.
The sponsor continue to yield?
Do you continue to yield?
Yes.
Sponsor yields.
So the information coming from the State Board of Elections would be made public before it goes to the institutions, so that individuals could verify that information before it becomes part of this collection with the institute?
The board is required to publish the information within 5 days of receipt.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Martins.
Would the sponsor yield for a few questions?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
I'm concerned about those municipalities that don't have Board of Elections oversight. For example, Madam President, our school boards in suburban communities and rural communities, they oversee their own elections. So they're not subject to Board of Elections oversight. Our villages have their own oversight. Typically, it's the village clerk that oversees elections in the village, and so they don't have Board of Elections oversight. Districts, water districts, fire districts, and the like, they have their own oversight over their own elections, and therefore they're responsible for those. And so the idea of passing that information on to someone else where there isn't that jurisdiction now, I just had a question. Is that what you envision by this bill, requiring municipalities that do not and are not subject to state Board of Elections or county Board of Elections oversight, that they would have to make this data available to that Board of Elections?
Through you, Madam President, school districts would only be required to send this information to the Institute, not the State Board of Elections. But to the larger point of who is bearing the cost and what the implications might be, part of the reason, part of the impetus for this bill is exactly as you stated, Senator, that there are water districts, school districts, sewer districts where we have very little to no information. And so we know for a fact that there has been litigation in school districts and fire districts where language minorities, racial minorities have never seen themselves elected to any of those positions. But it is hard to bring litigation to prove that because there's no information and there's no collective information. And so that's part of why we are asking that this reporting be done in a swift way, such that anyone who is looking to vindicate some of those rights or to just pick up how we can run our elections better will have that information.
President, through you, would the sponsor continue to yield?
Do you continue to yield?
Yes.
Sponsor yields.
Thank you. You mentioned perhaps discrimination, racial profiling, and other measures that may prevent classes of citizens who would otherwise participate in the process from participating when it comes to districts. Do you have any examples that you'd like to talk to us about, anything you'd like to share with us as part of your incentive for including those districts as part of your legislation?
Madam President, I would be happy to provide a list of lawsuits that have been brought both in the school district context and in the village context where they were trying to prove that there was discrimination of some sort. I'm very happy to provide that to you and to your entire conference.
Continue to yield?
You continue to yield?
Yes.
Sponsor yields.
So if there is going to be this additional reporting requirement for entities that did not have that requirement in the past, and the legislation is specific that it has to be in electronic format and it has to include certain data, does your bill include any reimbursement, that is, payment for this new mandate that would be placed on what would relatively be a small district or village that would not otherwise have a requirement to provide this information? We're talking about school districts, water districts, fire districts, villages. Is there any reimbursement for those expenses to offset the impacts of this new state mandate?
For you, Madam President, the bill does not explicitly provide a reimbursement mechanism. That's certainly a discussion we're willing to have. I will note that the bill is the creation of a fund in order to help with the operations of the Institute, and I can see a scenario in which both SUNY and CUNY, having gone through the paces a bit, make a determination that this is something that might be utilized for their fund, but I'm certainly willing to have more of a discussion on that.
President, through you, if the sponsor would continue to yield for one last question.
Senator, do you continue to yield?
Of course.
Senator yields.
Thank you. Senator, you mentioned that there may be lawsuits, or there may have been lawsuits claiming some discriminatory intent or that the process in itself was discriminatory. Aside from lawsuits, have there ever been a judgment or adjudication of an issue of discrimination when it comes to any of these entities, districts, villages, when it comes to elections, such that would form the basis of such a broad, expensive, and far-reaching requirement for, in many instances, institutions that have limited resources and would have to take those resources and spend them to provide this information rather than providing the resource that they provide for their local community. Is there any actual adjudication where any of these districts have been found to have acted in a discriminatory manner?
Madam President, the short answer to that is yes, and I'm again happy to provide it. But I'd argue that this bill actually helps ameliorate that issue because if you bring a lawsuit or bring an action because you feel that an election or a district was discriminatory in some fashion, oftentimes what the most money is spent on is experts. And you hire experts to look at the election data, and both sides can't agree on which data is the one that we're going to rely on. This, however, would change that process to say that the data provided by this institute, nonpartisan, would have a rebuttable presumption of validity such that we wouldn't have to spend money or time on the data in determining whether or not this is reliable. And it might help evince no discrimination. If you're in a village or a town or a school district and the information from the institute shows that, wait a second, actually this doesn't bear out in the facts, then we're avoiding the cost of litigation, the cost to the municipalities, all of the things that you guys are worried about.
Madam President, on the bill.
Senator Martin's on the bill.
Thank you. Madam President, I'm concerned about this bill. I'm concerned about the cost that it would pass on to small municipalities, whether they be villages or districts, that have limited resources. They take those resources, they marshal their resources. They tend to be the most capable and most efficient forms of government, at least in my experience. And here we are going to impose a requirement wholesale that data has to be provided in a certain form. They may not have the ability to provide that data. They may not have ever had to provide it that way, but now they have to upgrade their own computer systems, their own reporting requirements, all for the sole purpose of some abstract without there actually being a concrete example. I have no doubt that our county boards of elections throughout the state have the capacity to provide this information. But once we start getting into towns, villages, special districts, the kinds of communities, frankly, that I represent, it gets onerous, it's expensive, and although I understand that there may be those in this body that represent a community that is far larger and has the resources to do that, but I don't. And certainly my communities are stretched to the limit when it comes to making ends meet, continuing to provide resources, continuing to serve the community, and shouldn't be asked to take resources from those things that they do, whether it's a fire district, whether it's a water district, whether it's a village. Take resources from the things that they do, that they were elected to do in order to create a database. And if the state wants it, then they should be prepared to reimburse them for it, and this bill should wait for that reimbursement to be included in it before it's passed by this body. And so I'll be voting no.
Are there any other senators wishing to be heard? Seeing and hearing none, debate is closed. The secretary will ring the bell. Read the last section.
Section 8, this action take effect immediately.
Call the roll.
Adabo, Gianaris, Kruger, Ort, Stewart, Cousins, White.
Senator Canzaneri Fitzpatrick to explain her vote.
Madam President, for the reasons recently just stated by my colleague Jack Martins, my district contains many special districts, local villages, sanitation districts, fire districts, water districts, and multiple incorporated villages. As a former trustee and deputy mayor in the local village of Malvern, I had the task of balancing a budget of a small local village with unfunded mandates that came down from this body. And it is extremely onerous on local government to balance those burdens and take away from the tasks that they're trying to accomplish. So for those reasons, I voted no. Thank you.
Senator Canzanieri Fitzpatrick to be recorded in the negative. Announce the results.
In relation to calendar number 19, those senators voted in the negative are Senators Borrello, Canzanieri Fitzpatrick, Gallivan, Helming, Martins, Matera, Murray, Oberacker, O'Mara, Ort, Rhodes, Rollison, Steck, Tedisco, Walzig, Weber, and White. Ayes 43, nays 17.
The bill is passed. Senator Gianaris.
Madam President, move on to calendar number 9 by Senator Hoylman.
The Secretary will read.
Calendar number 9, Senate Print 610 by Senator Hoylman, an act to amend the election law.
The Secretary will ring the bell. No. Oh, Senator Walczyk, why do you rise?
Madam President, would the sponsor yield for some questions?
Yes.
Senator Hoylman, do you rise?
Yes.
No, obviously you rise.
I rise and I say yes.
He rises and says yes. Thank you. Senator will respond.
Through you, Madam President, what is the goal of this bill?
Through you, Madam President, the goal of this bill is to make it easier to vote. I think the goal of all these bills are to make it easier to vote, to bring democracy to the people so we can actually fulfill our duties as citizens. I think many of my colleagues have constituents who remember that casting a mail ballot for the first time in 2020 was due to the COVID-19 pandemic. But I think a lot of people would be surprised to know that 1 in 5 absentee ballots from New York City were invalidated during the June 2020 primaries for reasons related to the mail-in process. So what we're doing with this legislation, Madam President, is allowing county boards of elections to set up drop boxes outside of traditional polling places or Board of Election offices where voters can easily and conveniently return their absentee ballots and help avoid these mail-related invalidations and ensure every vote is counted. In 2020, all but 10 states allowed absentee ballots to be submitted via drop boxes, and nationwide, there are 23 states that already allow absentee ballot drop boxes by statute. So we will be conforming with more than about half of the states in this country.
Thank you for the explanation of the goal of the bill. Madam President, through you, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Do you continue to yield?
Yes.
Sponsor yields.
You mentioned 1 in 5 votes by mail in New York City were invalidated. Should we be very concerned about the ability for the United States Postal Service to deliver ballots effectively?
President, well, what we're focused on here is ballot drop boxes. We know that the post office has its issues, and I assume we have legislation that will address some of those defects. But what we're doing with ballot drop boxes is creating another secure alternative to the U.S. Post Office that is convenient. It's as convenient as dropping off a book in a book repository at your local library.
The sponsor would continue to yield.
Do you continue to yield?
Yes.
The Senator yields.
To your knowledge, has the United States Postal Service lost ballots in the state of New York?
President, no.
And through you, Madam President, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Yes.
Sponsor yield.
Has the United States Postal Service committed fraud in the state of New York?
President, not to my knowledge.
And through you, Madam President, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
You continue to yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
If we're concerned about mailing in ballots, should we be requiring people to pick up their ballots in person?
Madam President, no. We're simply creating more opportunities for convenience, secure drop-off, and ease of voting, which should be our goal, as my colleagues have reiterated today, as a democratic institution representing the people of the state of New York.
And through you, Madam President, if the sponsor would be so kind as to continue to yield.
Do you continue to yield?
Yes, I would be so kind.
In your opening remarks on the goal of this legislation, you did mention 1 in 5 ballots were invalidated in New York City, and the goal of this is to fix that. Was that because of an error done by the United States Postal Service?
President, no, not to my knowledge.
And through you, Madam President, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Sponsor yields.
Is the sponsor aware that there are a fair number of people that don't trust a drop box for their ballot?
Madam President, oh boy, do I ever. One of them is the 45th President of the United States, who perpetrated the big lie that the 2020 election was stolen because of ballot drop boxes. There have been conspiracy theorists from one side of our nation to the other who have perpetrated these mistruths without a single scintilla of evidence. It's shocking to me that we would even be mentioning this the week after the January 6th insurrection.
Madam President, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Do you continue to yield?
Yes.
Sponsor yields.
Well, we may have disparaging things to say about the certain ways that some people think or don't think. Would you acknowledge that there are certain people who don't trust drop boxes, that could be considered disenfranchisement of some voters in the state of New York?
Through you, Madam President, no. There is no evidence that fraud has been perpetrated through drop boxes. I know it is the bugbear of the far right and QAnon conspiracy theorists, but study after study after study, academic, reporters, nonpartisan, have all come to the same conclusion about fraud, about drop boxes. There's no evidence. In fact, if I may continue, in fact, just the opposite. There's a recent study that showed that ballot drop boxes increase participation by 0.65%, depending on the proximity to the vote.
Madam President, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
You continue to yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
In the last provision of your bill, I noticed that these drop boxes would be available even up until the close of the polls on Election Day. Is that correct?
President, yes.
And through you, Madam President, would the sponsor continue to yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Is it the current practice and statute to allow the postmark right up until the close of polls on Election Day, or do you need to receive, in order to have an absentee ballot acceptable, does it have to be postmarked that day? Through you, Madam President.
It will need to be postmarked by Election Day. We do know that there are delays with the post office. We hope that ballot drop boxes would circumvent some of those delays.
Madam President, whether it's early voting pop-up sites or polling locations as they've traditionally been, what would be the benefit to a voter in the state of New York to drop an absentee ballot in a drop box rather than go to their polling place on Election Day?
Excuse me, Senator Wolsick, I assume you meant to ask if the sponsor would yield.
I did mean to ask whether the sponsor would continue to yield.
Senator Hartman, do you yield?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Question has been asked.
The benefit to the voter is ease, convenience, proximity, exercising their right to vote. That's not just a benefit to the voter, it's a benefit to the entire state of New York.
President, I appreciate your answers. On the bill.
Senator Walsick on the bill.
There's a couple of questions in this lineup. You know, obviously we can have differences in opinion in how the election law should be administered in the state of New York. I think if you were to put this out on the ballot, voters would have a different opinion. It would be nice to afford them that opportunity, but I think New Yorkers that we represent realize that there's plenty of distrust for the way that elections have run, and I think probably not just your QAnon conspiracy theorists, but on both sides of the aisle. Sometimes when you lose, whether it's in a sporting event, you blame it on the refs, or sometimes in the arena of politics, you could blame it on the rules that seem to be fixed in one direction or the other. And I'm sensitive to that. I mean, we all play by the same rules. But not to consider that there's a significant amount of the population that doesn't trust the way that you run an election or are proposing to change that we run an election is really missing the point on encouraging people to vote and enfranchising their vote. And on the portion where that seems like a new precedent to me, where we're saying your absentee ballot right up until the moment the polls close. I mean, I'm aware of a process called exit polling, where people are asked whether they voted for one candidate or another when they come out of the polling place, Madam President. And I'm aware that campaigns have a mechanism to track, by calling their local board of elections and voting sites, to track exactly which people have voted and where, which means that by the end of Election Day, before polls close, while your drop box by this proposal is still technically open to accept ballots, a campaign would know precisely who in that electoral district has voted and not voted. And I'm not saying that anybody would ever create fraud in this business, but certainly for a citizen in New York State to look at that process and stand up and say something doesn't smell right and I see an opportunity, and then to further distrust this system, I think with this legislation in place would have a grand opportunity to feel like their vote doesn't count. And that would be my biggest concern going into this vote. Madam President, that's why I'll be voting no and encourage my colleagues to do the same. Thank you.
Are there any other senators wishing to be heard? Seeing and hearing none, debate is closed. The secretary will ring the bell. Read the last section.
Section 4, this act take effect immediately.
Call the roll.
Addabbo, Gianaris, Kruger, Ort, Stewart Cousins, White.
Announce the results.
In relation to Calendar 9, those senators voted in the negative are Senators Ashby, Borrello, Canzoneri Fitzpatrick, Gallaby, Hellman, Martins, Matera, Murray, Oberacker, O'Mara, Ort, Rhodes, Robertson, Steck, Tedisco, Walzett, Weber, and White. Ayes 42, nays 18.
The bill is passed. Senator Gianaris.
Last but not least, Madam President, can we take up calendar number 5 by Senator Jackson?
The secretary will ring the bell. The secretary will read.
Calendar number 5, Senate Print 350 by Senator Jackson, an act to amend the election law.
Senator Walsick.
Thank you, Madam President. Would the sponsor yield?
Senator Jackson, do you yield?
Yes, I will.
Senator Yields.
Thank you. Through you, Madam President, what's the problem that we're trying to solve with this bill today?
We're trying to put forward a bill that has standard operating procedures as far as filing appeals or any type of litigation in the process. And that is with 4 appellate division court areas, one in the first department in New York County, the second department in Westchester County, the third in Albany, and the last one in Erie County, in essence, Buffalo. And then it would be standard operating procedure. If you disagree with any type of electoral process, this is where you go to do it.
And through you, Madam President, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Do you continue to yield?
Yes.
Senator Yields.
The sponsor mentioned standard operating procedure. Whose standard operating procedure would that be? Would that be in statute? Is that by the Office of Court Administration?
What we're doing is trying to avoid bad faith, processing of appeals in order to circumvent or slow up the democratic process as far as voting is concerned.
Madam President, I wonder if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Yield? Yes, sponsor yields.
In that standard operating procedure, whose bad faith are you referring to?
Anyone that wants to destroy the democratic process for people to vote with, knowing that their votes will be counted and with transparency. It could be anyone.
President, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Do you continue to yield? Yes.
Did the Office of Court Administration ask specifically for this change in their standard operating procedure?
No, not to my knowledge, but there's other areas in which things are happening not only in New York State, but around the entire country regarding this.
Through you, Madam President, would the sponsor continue to yield?
Do you continue to yield? Yes. Sponsor yields.
I think you've explained why you're restricting the venue to 4 specific counties. Does it have anything to do with the political makeup of the 4 counties? Or was that a consideration?
It had to do with the fact that in areas in New York City, Manhattan, Bronx, and what have you, that's the first department. Long Island and Westchester County, the second, so forth and so on. Goes all the way up to Erie County and Buffalo.
And through you, Madam President, would the sponsor continue to yield?
Yes.
Why a New Yorker that wants to challenge the constitutionality of an election law, for example, why would they want to travel from the east end of Long Island to Westchester in order to do so?
Jurisdiction of the appellate division in the areas where people live at.
And through you, Madam President, would the sponsor continue to yield?
Do you continue to yield? Yes. Sponsor yields.
And why would some New Yorker that wants to challenge the constitutionality of New York State's election law want to travel from St. Lawrence County to Albany County?
I'm so sorry. Can you repeat the question, please?
And through you, Madam President, I would. Why would a New Yorker that feels possibly disenfranchised or that one of the election laws that we put in place today is not in keeping with our oath of office and against the New York State Constitution that we swore to uphold, why would that voter have to travel from St. Lawrence County to Albany County?
As far as this bill is concerned, it would be in the jurisdictions that they live in based on already established where the departments are located at. So first department, second, third, fourth.
Through you, Madam President, would the sponsor continue to yield?
Do you continue to yield?
Yes, Madam
The
President.
sponsor yields.
Are there other areas of the law where we've given this strict and narrowed approach to the judiciary?
And the answer is yes.
Would the sponsor continue to yield?
Yes, the sponsor yields.
What areas of law would those be?
But the Albany Commercial Division regarding insurance policy and these 4 areas of the courts where an appeal should be filed was the same put forward last year when we voted on the John Lewis Voting Rights Act.
And through you, Madam President, would the sponsor continue to yield?
Do you continue to yield? Yes, the sponsor yields.
Have any of those provisions of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act been challenged for their constitutionality yet?
My knowledge.
And through you, Madam President, would the sponsor continue to yield?
Do you continue to yield? Yes, the sponsor yields.
Has the Attorney General issued an advisory opinion on the constitutionality of this legislation that you're proposing today?
To my knowledge.
And through you, Madam President, would the sponsor...
Am I putting this forward? I think that in the explanation here, this bill attempts to reduce the partisan gamesmanship that occur in election law-related litigation. Currently, it is too easy for those seeking to destabilize the electoral process to do so through frivolous litigation. So this bill aims to reduce that and prevent the forum shopping that seems recently by designating one court in each judicial department in the state and the appropriate venue to challenge the election law. And I said to you earlier in answering an earlier question, I didn't say it was Republicans. It could be Republicans, Democrats, Independents, whoever it is. It's putting order in our process and to avoid, filing litigation which trying to stop the system from going forward in a democratic way.
Through you, Madam President, would the sponsor continue to yield?
Do you continue to yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
If we are going to make a determination on how the judicial branch should do their business, why wouldn't we just make an amendment to the state constitution and restructure the way that the appellate division works in these challenge cases? Madam President, on the bill.
Senator Walsick on the bill.
I mean, this seems like insider baseball stuff, and it really is. The constitutionality of certain provisions of the John Lewis Voting Act haven't been challenged yet. And I just bring up the Constitution in this debate a couple of times because I think it's important. Actually, we all think it's important because we were all in this room with our left hand on a Bible, many of us, and all of our right hands in the air, and we swore to uphold it. The Office of Court Administration didn't ask specifically for this legislation. The Attorney General hasn't ruled on it. The provisions that are anything like it haven't been challenged on a constitutional basis. And it has a constitutional bearing. We're telling the judicial branch, and really New Yorkers that may feel that some of the laws in New York State that affect the way that we do elections in New York State are challenged for their constitutionality. It's funny that coming off of a debate where we talked about putting drop boxes as close to people's homes all over New York State so that they could feel so enfranchised that even on election day, up until the moment that the polls close, they could put that absentee in the drop box, and don't worry, they will be enfranchised. Those same exact voters, if they want to challenge a law in the state of New York, well, congratulations if you're out east on Long Island. You've got to drive to Westchester and pay an attorney to do that. And congratulations if you're up on the Canadian border. You have to drive to either Rochester or Albany if you want to challenge that. Talk about disenfranchisement. Since you're amending the New York State Constitution and you're telling courts how to challenge the Constitution, we're essentially, and I understand the gentleman's comments, concerns about cherry-picking judges from certain counties or certain areas. This is exactly what you're doing in reverse. You're saying now only our judges, only the judges that we select in these 4 counties, and you will drive to go see them. Well, that doesn't seem very fair. Last week we swore an oath to uphold the Constitution, and this week, well, we'll have an opportunity, just with this vote right here, to hold up our end of that bargain to the state of New York. I'm not going to violate this oath, not this guy. I'll be voting no, and I appreciate the opportunity, Madam President.
Senator Steck, why do you rise?
President, the sponsor would please yield. Question.
Senator Jackson, do you yield?
Yes.
Sponsor yields.
Thank you. Thanks, Senator Jackson. Happy New Year. So I'm not the ranking member on the Elections Committee. Certainly, like I think everyone in this room and all of our staffs, and hopefully the vast majority of our constituents. I care deeply about our elections process. I want to make sure I understand this bill. I think I do, but I want to make it clear for perhaps those watching at home. This bill would limit challenges to elections law constitutionality issues to 4 counties. If you have an issue that you want to bring forth questioning the constitutionality of some sort of a portion of our elections law, you'd have to either go to New York City, Westchester County, Albany County, or Erie County. Is that correct?
If it's a constitutionality of the allegations.
All right, so Madam President, the sponsor would continue to yield, please.
Yield?
Yes.
Senator Yield.
Thank you. So there's 62 counties in the state of New York. I represent all parts of 6 of them. Out of those 62 counties, the only place to bring that kind of lawsuit, that kind of question, would be judges in those 4 counties. Is that correct?
Yes. Depending on where you lived at. So if you lived upstate in the county next to Erie County, the jurisdiction would be in Buffalo. I mean, why would you travel all the way to New York to file it?
The sponsor would continue to yield.
You continue to yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
All right. It's a beautiful state that we live in. It's a very large and diverse state. It can be difficult to travel, depending on the time of year, depending on where you live in the state. I'm just curious, have you ever been to Franklin County?
I have not. I don't even know where it is.
That would have been my sub-question, but thanks for answering that for me. Madam President,
My daughters went to University of Buffalo, so I've been up there many years.
that's farther away than New York City for me, but Madam President, the sponsor would continue to yield, please.
Do you continue to yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
All right, thank you, Madam President. I won't go through all the counties I represent, but just real quick, have you ever been to Clinton County or Warren County?
I don't know. I may have driven through there. I mean, when I played basketball at SUNY New Paltz, I went to many places upstate.
All right, fair enough. Well, SUNY New Paltz, okay. Back home, they're laughing right now.
I said there's many other places that we went to play, Cortland and all over the place.
All right, Madam President, on the bill.
Senator Steck on the bill.
All right, thank you. I appreciate Senator Jackson's time, and thank you for allowing me to have a little bit of fun with him here. But this is a very important issue to me and to everybody. My Senate district, my Senate district is larger than the state of Connecticut and Rhode Island combined. When I leave my house and I drive to the farthest point of my district, that's a 3.5-hour drive. This bill would ask those people that live up on the Canadian border in Potsdam, in Messina, in Canton, in Malone, in Plattsburgh, to drive 3, 4, 5 hours to Albany. That is not equal access to the law. That is not equal access to their government. That is not equal access to the courts. You are disenfranchising rural voters with this legislation. Somebody that lives in Franklin County, that's Saranac Lake, that's Tupper Lake, that's Malone, good part of the Adirondacks, gorgeous part of our state, they have every right to expect to have the same treatment by the laws of the state of New York as somebody that lives in Westchester County or New York City or Erie County. Their money's as green as yours and mine. Their taxes are as high as yours and mine. They should not have to. And oh, by the way, in every other aspect of New York State, they're paying through the nose because they live so rural. If you want medical treatment, if you want mental health treatment, people up there likely have to drive to Syracuse or Albany for the services that many of you hop on the subway for or walk down the block for. But one of the most basic tenets of our democracy is that they should have equal access to the law, equal justice for all. All you're doing here is you're penalizing rural voters, and we've all seen the maps. We've all seen the maps. We know what red or blue, where red or blue tend to live. I find it impossible to believe that this was not done with that lens at all. I don't see a benefit to anyone except for somebody looking for partisan advantage to making it more difficult for somebody that lives in Steuben County or Clinton County or Franklin County or Essex County or Warren County or Washington County to access the courts. And that's exactly what this bill would do. It is wrong on so many levels. It is beneath us as elected officials to tolerate legislation like this. I'll be voting against it, and I hope that everyone else does too.
Senator Martins?
Madam President, if the sponsor would yield for a few questions.
Senator Jackson, do you yield?
Yes.
Thank you, Madam President. Through you, the sponsor had mentioned that the purpose of this bill is to combat frivolous challenges and lawsuits involving the election law. I was hoping that the sponsor would be able to provide us with perhaps an example of the type of frivolous lawsuits to which he is referencing.
Say that this bill was brought about by a member of my team. We're discussing the electoral process. And this lawsuit was filed to challenge absentee ballots. And Republican and conservative parties filed a lawsuit in October of 2022 to challenge the constitutionality of the absentee ballot law that allows an excuse to be fear of catching COVID, okay? Everybody had, the COVID pandemic. So approximately 188,000 voters used absentee ballots to cast votes in 2022 election. The lawsuit was filed in Saratoga County, presided over by Justice Diane Freestone. Justice Freestone was the first vice chair of the Saratoga County Republican Party. Justice Freestone ruled that the law for canvassing absentee ballots was unconstitutional. An appellate division overturned Justice Freestone's ruling and held that the lawsuit was filed too late. So, what we're saying, it doesn't matter if you're Republican, conservative, Democrat, but if you file a frivolous lawsuit, we want to make sure that you go through the process to file it correctly in the 4 geographical areas when you're challenging the constitutionality of any of the matters. And this is what we're trying to do to make sure that democracy is really in action, where people can file absentee ballots and expect those absentee ballots to be counted and not challenged 6-8 months later when there should have been, if any, a real challenge, should have been challenged right when within 1 month of when the violation occurred. And so that's what brought about this bill.
If the sponsor would continue to yield.
Senator Jackson, do you continue?
Yes.
Yes, Senator Yield.
Thank you. Senator, in that action that was brought in Saratoga County, was the plaintiff a resident of Saratoga County? Madam President, on the bill.
Senator Martins on the bill.
So we've spent the good part of today in the afternoon talking about expanding the right to vote, access to government for people to be able to participate in the process, and yet here we are. Because someone in this state chooses to challenge the constitutionality of a law, if it happens to be an election law, we're going to limit their ability to do so. As was mentioned earlier, there are 62 counties in this state. That means there are 62 Supreme Courts, each in a separate county. That was done for a reason, Madam President. That was done so that everyone would have access to justice locally. Now, I'm not going to presuppose whether a lawsuit in Saratoga County was frivolous or whether there was a lawsuit in Nassau County that was frivolous or in Erie County or any other county. But I will defend the right of every citizen in this state and every person in this state to avail themselves of the justice system as it was set up by the state's constitution. The New York State Constitution recognizes the Supreme Court of the state of New York in each county as a court of general jurisdiction. That means that the citizens and residents of that state county have the right to go to that county court to challenge any laws that they want. It's up to them. And they may be frivolous. They may be wrong, but they may be right. And they have an absolute right under the state constitution to challenge their laws. Now, Madam President, as you know, I represent an area of the North Shore of Nassau County. I happen to be in the 2nd Appellate Division. And anyone, myself included, if I wanted to challenge a law, would have to go up to Westchester. Now, our colleague, Senator Steck, mentioned that it can take 3.5, 4 hours for him to drive from one end of his district to the other. Being in Nassau County and having to go through New York City, it may well take me more than 4 hours to go from Nassau County to Westchester. But how about understanding that there is a system in place and that every resident in this state should be able to avail themselves and to seek justice when they want. Not because we choose to allow them, not because we believe that certain lawsuits are frivolous, but because they have a fundamental right under the Constitution to challenge those laws, to challenge us. Because we, as a body, certainly can make mistakes. And if we do, and if we overstep, they should be able to go to their local Supreme Court and file that challenge. Not because we decided they're going to go to Erie, Albany, New York, or Westchester County. My colleagues, please, let's understand what we're doing here. We're creating winners and losers because we've decided that we're going to make it less or more difficult, let me put it that way, for our residents, for those we represent, to seek justice and to challenge government. And that's not something I can tolerate. Madam President, I'll be voting no, and I urge my colleagues to do the same. Thank you.
Senator Rhodes.
President, will the sponsor yield?
Senator Jackson, do you yield?
Yes.
Thank you,
Senator
Senator
Yields.
Jackson.
Happy New Year
Very
to
nice
you.
to meet you. Happy New Year. Article 7 of the New York State Constitution sets forth the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court as the court of original jurisdiction. This legislation, however, restricts the ability of local Supreme Courts to be able to hear cases involving the constitutionality and sends it directly to the appellate division. Have you sought any opinion as to whether or not this bill is constitutional and why this was not presented as an amendment to the Constitution, given what Article 7 says?
Start at the appellate division. As you know, it would have to be started at the Supreme Court level within the jurisdiction of that appellate division. So in regards to Nassau County, you can file it in Nassau County as far as Supreme Court, but the appellate division has to be filed within the jurisdiction of the appellate division.
It has to be filed within the jurisdiction of the appellate division? Sorry.
Filed in a certain court. Part of the Supreme Court. So yes, you would have to file it within the appellate division wherever you live at.
To yield to another question, Madam
Do you
President?
continue to yield?
Yes.
Sponsor yield.
So if I want to challenge the constitutionality of a provision of the election law as a Nassau County resident, right now, I would go to the Nassau County Supreme Court and I would file my challenge. If I want to challenge this under your law, where would I now have to go?
In response, Madam, these lawsuits are being filed by political parties and people that are representatives of political parties, and that they are challenging the constitutionality of it.
Sponsor, yield to another question?
Continue to yield.
But as a private citizen, don't I have the right to file a challenge? Does it have to be a political party?
Anyone can file a lawsuit, but that's not really what the reality is. The reality is that political parties are throwing themselves in there in order to stop the system where, in this particular case that I cited, 188,000 absentee ballots, they were trying to throw those out. And where? It wasn't in New York City. You know, we must allow the democratic process for people to vote by absentee ballots, that they're entitled to do that, especially during the pandemic. And that's what that was about. And what, you mean to tell me you would want those ballots not to be counted? Come on.
Senator Rhodes on the bill.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you for yielding to my questions. I believe that this bill is flatly unconstitutional. The bottom line is Article 7 of the state constitution establishes the jurisdiction of the court, establishes where those courts are supposed to be heard, and this bill essentially is changing that without amending the Constitution. Essentially, what Senator Jackson, I believe, is concerned about is forum shopping. But the solution to forum shopping is not the state legislature choosing the forum for litigants. There are provisions if someone brings a frivolous lawsuit. Judges have discretion to be able to order sanctions. Appellate divisions have the ability to order sanctions for frivolous lawsuits. And in the particular example that the senator gave, I have no idea what the outcome was, but I suspect that the cost of the litigation, as well as a sanction, if it was frivolous, probably was imposed on whatever party brought it frivolously. The courts have the ability to handle that. So to try and solve a problem or a perceived problem on a day when what we've been talking about with respect to all of the other bills that we've considered is how to provide people additional access to the government, we are now effectively telling somebody that lives in Montauk, out in the far end of Suffolk County, that you have to drive 2 hours to get to Westchester in order to be able to access the court that you would ordinarily just have to go to Riverhead to be able to access 40 minutes away. Or, as Senator Steck's example, you might have to drive 3.5 or 4 hours to be able to access a venue. So I'm concerned about this on a number of levels. Whereas we've been talking about providing access, what this bill effectively does is deny access to the courts. Because we're concerned about political parties acting, we're going to take away the rights of every single constituent to be able to access the courts when they have concerns about the constitutionality of the election system. Protecting democracy? This is in effect destroying democracy, because you're refusing to allow people to have the ability, when they're challenging a law that this body passes, denying them the opportunity to effectively be able to appeal that law. Because for most people, it's not worth driving 3 hours to get to a courthouse when they could drive 10 minutes away from their location. They're simply not going to do it. It's ensuring that only political parties will be the ones. And then to substitute our judgment as to what the form of litigation should be for decisions that are made by individual litigants, that's not the way the process is supposed to work. So I would urge my colleagues, take a look at what we're doing here. Instead of giving rights, we're effectively taking rights away. And we're doing so in a form that if it were challenged, the constitutionality of it were challenged, I certainly don't think passes muster, if you take a look at Article 7. So I will be voting against this bill to protect my residents' rights to be able to access the courts in a convenient manner. And I would encourage my colleagues to do the same. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Murray.
Madam President, can I speak on the bill?
Senator Murray on the bill.
Thank you. I'm just trying to figure out what we're doing here right now. We voted on multiple bills under the premise of making it easier, giving greater access to voters, to letting them participate in the process, and to make it easier for everyone. Now we're voting on a bill that would make it more difficult to challenge that process? I live in Suffolk County. Last night, I had an early morning radio interview this morning, so I figured I'm going to come up, be well rested. So I left a little late last night. I left right when the Green Bay-Detroit game kicked off, and I'm listening to it on the radio. I left my office in my home in East Patchogue, By the time I hit Westchester, which is where I would have to go if I wanted to file a grievance, we were entering the fourth quarter of the game. Meanwhile, I could have gone 20 minutes to Riverhead. I bypassed Mineola. This is making it easier? How can we possibly justify this? How can we possibly say, after voting on the previous bills, again, under the guise of making it easier, we're now going to make it harder? I just don't understand what we're doing here when we want people participating. And if they have questions on the process, they should be able to do that. As you said the sponsor himself said there were frivolous lawsuits brought about, and they were found to be frivolous. That's how the system works. But we don't limit the ability to file these grievances because we think they may be frivolous. We let the system work. But by limiting it in this basis, as previous speakers have said, there's 62 counties, 62 Supreme Courts. We're going to limit it down to 4. And we're making it easier? I don't think so. For that reason, I'll be voting no, and I urge everyone in this chamber to do the same.
Senator Steck on the bill.
I apologize very briefly on the bill. As I've listened, the more concerned I am. I've been in the legislature, this is my 11th year now, and I've seen a lot of legislation that I did not like. I saw a lot of legislation that, in my opinion, was clearly unconstitutional. I am not an attorney. A simple layman's read. This is, it may not be the most controversial, it may be inside baseball, it may be the kind of thing that a lot of people are going to be knowingly affected by, but this is the most blatantly unconstitutional piece of legislation that I've seen in over my decade in the House. It is, we are disenfranchising residents of 58 counties, and we're showing preference to residents of 4 counties, 4 of the biggest and bluest counties in the state of New York. Point was just made. We just spent the better part of today trying to bend over backwards to make it really, really easy and perhaps not as secure to access the ballot box. Personally, I struggle to see how it's a big deal to find a way to vote on Election Day, and all the other access that we had already, I thought was a tremendous improvement or extension. But to say that that doesn't go far enough and to pass the legislation that we earlier did today, and then turn around in the same breath and try to constrict access to the courts, 58 out of 62 counties, you won't be able to challenge the constitutionality of election law because of this. It's outrageous.
Other senators wishing to be heard? Seeing and hearing none, debate is closed. The secretary will ring the bell. Read the last section.
Section 2, this action take effect immediately.
Call the roll.
Addabbo, Giannaris, Kruger, Ort, Stewart-Cousins, White.
Senator Myrie to explain his vote.
Thank you, Madam President. Just for the record, and I hear my colleagues' outrage, this is not a unique structure in our law, particularly as it pertains to voting rights. You've heard for the John Lewis Voting Rights Act of New York, but for the strongest Voting Rights Act ever passed prior to Shelby County, the Supreme Court ruling in 2013, it used to be the case that all of those individual grievances or perceived violations of that were also relegated to certain courts in this state. If you were bringing a voting rights action that was federal, you had to go to certain courts in this state, and that's been the case for 50 years. So this isn't abnormal. This isn't something that we have not seen. Part of the reasoning there is that we have stability when it comes to the constitutionality of election law. As all of us know in this chamber, there is something unique about the election law as it pertains to elections happening. And what we've seen is constitutionality challenges during elections, right at the end of an election, that disturb the democratic process. So in order to insert predictability, stability, and to compare it to what we have done for over 50 years on the federal level, that is why I'll be voting yes. Thank you.
Senator Myrie to be recorded in the affirmative. Senator Giannaris to explain his vote.
Thank you, Madam President. Having listened to the debate in this chamber over the last couple of hours, I think the takeaway I have is a pretty simple one. My Democratic colleagues want to make it easier to vote and harder to bring frivolous lawsuits to disenfranchise people, and my Republican colleagues want to make it harder to vote and easier to bring frivolous lawsuits to disenfranchise people. I proudly vote in the affirmative.
Senator Gianaris to be recorded in the affirmative. Senator Skoufis to explain his vote.
Thanks very much, Madam President. I've listened attentively to this debate, and one would think that filing election lawsuits are as American as apple pie, that people just wake up the day after Election Day and they decide to defend their democracy and go to court and go to their nearest county courthouse. We all know better than that because half the people in this room have probably filed, or people on our behalf, our campaign's behalf, have filed election lawsuits. We know that's not how that happens. Tim Harkenrider and 3 other people in Steuben County didn't wake up one day and say, I'm going to file a lawsuit against the redistricting maps. Ed Cox and a few other people in the state party call up the locals, say, hey, we want to be in Steuben County, find us some committee members, find us some lawyers you work with, and put their name on a lawsuit. That's how election lawsuits happen in New York State. We're not disenfranchising anybody here. Folks in the North Country aren't going to have to travel 4 hours to file a lawsuit in Albany. The same way it works now will be the same way it works after this is enacted. Those folks in the North Country will call up John Ciampoli in Albany and say, hey, we've got a problem. We need you to file a lawsuit on our behalf. That's what happens in New York State. So for the 29 people who are watching this live feed and are questioning after watching this debate, oh my God, they're disenfranchising people. I'm not going to be able to file a law. Nobody does that in New York State. That's the truth. That's how it works before. That's how it works after. The only difference being you won't be able to forum shop.
How do you vote, Senator Skoufis? Senator Steck to explain his vote.
We finally got to the cusp of it here, and it came out, and I thank my colleague for bringing it out. And thank God for Steuben County and that Supreme Court that caught that case while they were venue shopping. Well, it happened to go there where it got a fair hearing. And how do I know it got a fair hearing? Because it went to the next level after the next level after the next level, till it finally got to the Court of Appeals. Justices all appointed by the governor, all by Democratic governors, and it still reeked so bad that no matter how hard they tried to look at an angle on those maps, your party's court designees ruled it unconstitutional, and we got a fair map out of that. The congressional maps were fair out of that, and frankly, the balance of power in the House of Representatives may have very well turned on that Supreme Court judge in Steuben County. So they did the venue shopping. You would have, under this legislation, this body venue shop and determine that instead of going to Steuben County, it would have gone to somebody in New York City. And I question whether or not we'd have gotten the same outcome on that redistricting challenge as we did here. But again, it started in Steuben County, a rural county, but it went all the way to the Court of Appeals, and the Court of Appeals had to, and I'm sure that it bugged a lot of them, and frankly, from what I see about the future of our Judiciary Committee and the direction we're going on appointing the next chief judge, apparently the courts bother a lot of people on the other side of the aisle in this chamber. I'm proudly voting no.
Senator Borrello to explain his vote.
Thank you, Madam President. I find it interesting that we're talking about trying to reduce frivolous lawsuits in New York State. This body passes legislation after legislation after legislation that includes private rights of action. What is a private right of action? It's so one person can create what is essentially a class action lawsuit, and that in itself creates many, many frivolous lawsuits, billions of dollars paid out, problems that we create. New York State is the most litigious state in the most litigious country in the nation. But all of a sudden, we want to take the high road, and we're going to stop frivolous lawsuits in New York State. No. You are indeed trying to stop the process of bringing a constitutional challenge. Because if you're really concerned about frivolous lawsuits in New York State, half the bills that we pass here wouldn't include a private right of action. That is exactly what that is. Frivolous lawsuits, that's what we do here. We incubate them in this chamber. And today, we're drawing a line in the sand to stop people from being able to successfully challenge the unconstitutionality of a particular law. So I'll be voting no. Thank you.
Senator Borrello to be recorded in the negative. Announce the result.
In relation to calendar number 5, those senators voted in the negative are Senators Ashby, Borrello, Canzoneri Fitzpatrick, Gallivan, Helming, Mannion, Martins, Matera, Murray, Oberacker, O'Mara, Ort, Rhodes, Rollison, Steck, Tedisco, Wozik, Weber, and White. Ayes 41, nays 19.
Bill is passed. Senator Gianaris, that completes the reading of the controversial calendar.
Is there any further business at the desk?
There is no further business at the desk.
I move to adjourn until tomorrow, Tuesday, January 10th at 11 a.m.
On motion, the Senate stands adjourned until Tuesday, January 10th at 11 a.m.